I think it's safe to say that change is on my agenda. Change for good. And I embrace that and I enjoy that change. I don't fear it.
It lasted only seconds, but everyone saw it. King Charles stepped forward at the public engagement, expecting the familiar gesture of respect from his eldest son. Prince William stopped directly before him, held the monarch's gaze, and refused to bow. Cameras continued flashing. Camilla froze. Catherine's expression tightened. What appeared to be a minor breach of protocol instantly became something far more dangerous. A public declaration that the relationship between father, son, and crown had reached breaking point. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William entered the Commonwealth Heritage Centre in London, knowing what tradition expected. A royal engagement is an official appearance where family members represent the monarchy before the nation. At such events, a bow signals respect for the sovereign and shows that personal tension remains beneath public duty. Yet the prince stopped, met Charles's eyes, offered only a restrained nod, and moved toward Catherine. Charles did not lose his smile. Hundreds of guests watched, and every camera waited for weakness. But the king's jaw tightened as the meaning reached him. His heir had not forgotten protocol. He had rejected it. Catherine felt the danger instantly. She touched William's arm for 1 second, not to correct him, but to steady the man beside her. Camilla leaned toward the monarch without changing her expression. "Do not react here," she whispered. The queen consort's warning exposed a deeper truth. She and Charles had arrived expecting trouble. William heard nothing, yet he saw her move closer to his father, confirming that the royal couple had prepared for resistance. A senior equerry stepped forward and hurried the program along. An equerry is a royal officer who helps manage ceremonial duties and keeps official events moving. He guided Charles toward the next guests, then signaled William's household to remain back. The separation looked orderly, but those nearby understood it as damage control. Inside the reception hall, Charles placed his ceremonial program on a table with sudden force. The silver pen beside it rolled across the surface and stopped near William's hand. The prince looked down, then back at his father, but did not move closer. Catherine watched both men in silence. Camilla stayed beside the king. The public witnessed a missing bow. The palace understood something more explosive. Less than 24 hours earlier, Charles had issued a private order that William believed threatened his family and the future of the crown. To understand why the prince chose the most visible moment possible to defy his father, the struggle must now be seen through the people standing on either side of that divide. This was never simply a dispute between a monarch and a prince. It was a collision between a father desperate to preserve his reign and a son increasingly convinced that silence had become a form of surrender. Charles saw obedience as continuity. William saw resistance as responsibility. Between them stood Catherine, attempting to protect both the future of the monarchy and the man carrying its weight, while Camilla watched a family disagreement transform into a battle over sovereign authority. Charles entered the antechamber. The room beside the reception hall offered privacy, but it could not erase what had happened. An antechamber is a waiting room beside a larger formal space, used before ceremonies. The king turned to an aide and asked one question. Had the refusal been clearly captured by the cameras? The answer came quietly. Yes. Charles closed his eyes. A sovereign depends on ritual to make power look stable, and a public break in that ritual invites questions about control. The monarch had spent years preparing for the crown, yet one silent gesture from his heir had made the institution appear divided. Catherine found William alone near a tall window, his hands locked behind his back. She told him the moment could not be undone. The prince did not look away. "That is why I did it," he answered. His words carried no triumph. They carried exhaustion. William respected the sovereign's office, but he no longer believed loyalty required obedience to every private decision. The heir is the person next in line to inherit the throne, and that position demands preparation for the future, as well as service to the present. He told Catherine that bowing would have looked like approval of an order he believed endangered the monarchy and threatened their family. Catherine felt the conflict tighten around her. She understood her husband's resolve, yet she could imagine the wound suffered by a father rejected in public by his eldest son. She reached for his hand and asked whether there had been another way. William answered that every private warning had been ignored. Camilla read the refusal differently. She believed the prince had sent a message to both royal households. The future court would no longer accept major decisions made without consultation. The queen consort shared that conclusion with Charles during the drive away, as the silence grew heavier. Camilla reached for his hand. Charles kept both hands on his walking cane. He chose the cameras, the king said. The missing bow had not begun the crisis. It had exposed a promise made behind closed doors at Windsor, involving Harry, royal duty, and a decision William feared could fracture the monarchy's future. 3 nights before the engagement, a private meeting at Windsor Castle crossed a line that neither father nor son could later retreat from. No cameras were present. No official minutes were meant to survive. Yet one sentence altered the balance between the reigning king and the future monarch. Charles announced that he intended to restore Prince Harry to a limited program of royal representation, and that the decision would proceed whether William supported it or not. From that moment, the public confrontation became almost inevitable. Charles believed time was running out. He wanted the family reunited before the final chapter of his reign hardened every wound beyond repair. Royal representation means carrying out official duties on behalf of the monarch, and the king believed 2 controlled Commonwealth appearances could begin restoring trust without returning Harry to permanent service. William saw danger where his father saw healing. The prince feared that a return without accountability would weaken Catherine, confuse the public, and reopen the cycle of private pain becoming public controversy. He had spent years protecting his household from that instability. Now Charles appeared ready to invite it back. The Windsor Library meeting became the trigger. Charles slid a prepared memorandum across the table authorizing Harry to represent the crown at 2 Commonwealth events. A memorandum is a formal written record of a decision or plan, and this one had been approved before William entered. William read the first page, set it down, and asked why he had been consulted only after the program was complete. Charles did not soften. A sovereign, he said, informs his heir when necessary. He does not ask permission. The words changed everything. William realized the dispute was no longer only about Harry. It was about whether his judgment mattered. Camilla had urged Charles to act quickly. The queen consort believed the prince would comply once the announcement became impossible to reverse. She also supported keeping Catherine outside the meeting, though the decision affected events the princess and William were expected to lead. That exclusion cut deeply. William saw it as proof that his household had been bypassed by design. Catherine later learned of the plan through a documented briefing sent to her office, confirming that the decision had been settled without her voice. William pushed back his chair. Before leaving, he looked at the memorandum and said, "Do not ask me to publicly endorse what you would not allow me to privately question." Charles answered with an order. The engagement would proceed under full ceremonial protocol, including the bow. When father and son met again before the cameras, both knew that gesture had become the visible answer to an invisible ultimatum. The doors closed, the aides were dismissed, and the smiles vanished. Inside a private reception room, Charles confronted William before the public engagement had even ended. The king accused his son of humiliating the crown. The prince refused to apologize. For the first time, the argument was no longer hidden behind careful language or ceremonial restraint. A father demanded loyalty, an heir demanded accountability. And standing only feet apart, both men spoke as though the future of the monarchy belonged to them alone. Charles ordered his private secretary to bring William away from the guests, journalists, and waiting members of the family. A private secretary is the senior aide who manages a royal figure's official work and confidential communication. The king wanted control, but the heavy door could not contain the anger rising behind it. Catherine remained outside with Camilla. The princess heard her husband's voice sharpen, then fall silent. The queen consort watched the closed door without moving, yet she understood the argument had already escaped the limits of protocol. Charles stepped toward his son. "You humiliated the crown." William held his ground. He answered that the monarchy had been endangered when private family wishes were placed above institutional trust. The prince insisted that obedience in public would have made him appear to support a decision he believed was reckless. Charles struck back harder. Refusing to bow, he said, was not courage. It was cruelty. The accusation wounded William because it came from his father, not merely his sovereign. Still, the future king refused to surrender his point. Charles then revealed the wider plan through the recorded account later prepared by his secretary. Harry's proposed role was meant to repair family relations before a major Commonwealth summit. a gathering where member nations discuss shared concerns and the monarchy's international role. The king believed reconciliation would strengthen his legacy. William answered with something Charles had not expected. He had seen a second version of the memorandum. That document granted Harry access to private strategic briefings, authority far beyond the ceremonial duties described at Windsor. Charles moved closer. "Who gave you that document?" William refused to name the source. The king removed his glasses and placed them carefully on the table. He warned that secrecy inside the heir's household was beginning to look like rebellion. William's anger broke into hurt. Every attempt to protect Catherine and their children, he said, had been treated as disloyalty. The door opened before Charles could answer. Camilla entered and delivered the warning. Palace officials were already debating an official response. The confrontation ended without an apology, but royal power was already deciding who would be protected and who would be blamed. Royal power rarely announces itself with shouting. It moves through revised schedules, canceled meetings, altered seating plans, and instructions delivered without signatures. Within hours of William's refusal, senior officials began constructing the palace response. Some argued that the heir must be corrected before defiance became precedent. Others warned that punishing him would expose the monarchy's deepest fracture. Charles held the sovereign authority. William held the future. Between those two realities, every advisor understood that choosing neutrality was no longer possible. Charles possessed the formal power to act. The sovereign is the reigning monarch, and that role gives the king control over ceremonial duties, access to state briefings, and appearances carried out in his name. He could reduce William's responsibilities with a single instruction, yet the prince held something no document could grant: public confidence, control of his household, and the certainty that the crown would one day pass to him. The king's private secretary placed 2 draft statements on the desk. One demanded a written apology. The other described the incident as a family misunderstanding. Charles first chose the stronger response, but the aide warned that William might refuse, forcing the palace to admit the conflict publicly. Camilla pressed for discipline. The queen consort argued that silence would make the monarch appear weak and encourage further resistance. Then she saw the exhaustion in Charles's face. Her certainty faltered, and she lowered her voice. Catherine received her own warning. An official notice informed her that a joint engagement with William had been placed under review. The phrase sounded administrative, but the princess understood its purpose. Pressure was being applied to her husband through the work they shared, threatening both their public role and their unity. Anne entered before Charles signed anything. The Princess Royal is the monarch's sister, and one of the family's most experienced working members. She told her brother that punishment imposed in anger could turn a private dispute into a constitutional spectacle, a crisis that makes the public question how the monarchy is being governed. Anne found Charles staring at both statements. She moved the harsher page aside and asked, "Do you want obedience from William, or reconciliation with your son?" Charles lifted his fountain pen. For several seconds, it hovered above the page. Then the king capped it and ordered both drafts withheld. The decision came too late. Somewhere beyond that room, authority had already moved, without waiting for final mercy or consent. A separate instruction had already removed William from a confidential planning session. Charles may have delayed the public response, but one quiet exclusion was enough to show the prince that the palace had already started closing doors around him. The retaliation did not arrive as a proclamation. It arrived as an empty space on a schedule. The following morning, William discovered that his name had been removed from a strategic briefing he had attended for years. No explanation was offered. No call came from his father. The message was unmistakable. The king could not force his son to bow, but he could remind the heir that the sovereign still controlled every door leading to the center of royal power. William's staff noticed the change before breakfast. His place at the Commonwealth planning meeting had vanished, replaced by a general written summary. The session covered international relationships, constitutional duties, and decisions the prince had spent years preparing to inherit. Removing him did more than cause embarrassment. It denied the future king access to the knowledge expected of the next sovereign. William read the revised schedule beside Catherine. He did not raise his voice. The prince folded the page once, placed it beside his untouched coffee, and stared at the table. The silence disturbed her more than anger would have. Catherine felt fury rise. She told her husband that Charles was punishing the monarchy's future to defend a choice shaped by personal regret. The princess understood why the exclusion mattered. It weakened William's preparation, while warning their entire household that disagreement would carry consequences. A trusted courtier called minutes later. A courtier is an official who serves the royal household and often carries sensitive instructions between senior figures. He told William that the removal had been approved before Charles reconsidered the formal response. Someone had pushed it through quickly. Evidence led toward Camilla's office. An aide there had circulated a written concern claiming William's conduct threatened the king's authority. The queen consort had argued for decisive action, but the speed of the exclusion suggested her household had acted before the monarch reached a final decision. William entered his private office and closed the door. He lifted a framed photograph of himself with Charles from the center of his desk. The prince did not destroy it. He opened a drawer, placed it face down, and shut the drawer softly. Charles learned the truth at Clarence House. His face fell when an aide confirmed that the exclusion had already taken effect. The king asked why no one had waited for his approval. No answer could hide the reality. Authority was slipping from both father and son. William refused to retaliate. Instead, he requested a private meeting with Charles, without Camilla, Catherine, secretaries, or advisors. The public refusal had divided them as monarch and heir, but the next meeting would force them to face each other as father and son. There were no uniforms, no briefing folders, and no advisors waiting beyond the table. William asked to meet Charles in a private sitting room, where neither man would speak through the machinery of the monarchy. For the first time since the crisis began, the crown was not allowed to dominate the conversation. A wounded father sat opposite a frustrated son. The silence between them carried decades of duty, disappointment, and love neither had learned to express without turning it into an argument about responsibility. William arrived alone at Clarence House. He asked that the doors remain closed until the conversation was finished. Clarence House is the king's London residence, but that night it became the last safe place where two men could speak without an audience. Charles had dismissed his staff before his son entered. The king kept the memorandum concerning Harry on the table. That document, a formal written plan, proved that the political dispute and the family wound could no longer be separated. William spoke first. The prince admitted that refusing to bow had been a protest, but he accepted that the gesture had caused his father pain beyond its institutional meaning. He had wanted to challenge a decision. Instead, he had publicly wounded a man who already felt exposed. Charles did not hide behind rank. He confessed that he had not experienced the refusal as disagreement from an heir. The monarch had felt rejected by his eldest son before the nation. His voice remained controlled, but the hurt beneath it was unmistakable. Charles then explained his deeper fear through the private conversation, later documented by his secretary. The king believed the family might remain permanently divided if he did nothing. He had hoped a limited role for Harry could repair what private appeals had failed to heal. William answered with equal honesty. He did not oppose reconciliation. The future king opposed restoring authority before trust, accountability, and clear boundaries existed. Forgiveness, he argued, could not require Catherine or the institution to ignore past damage. Charles slid the memorandum across the table. William took a pen and crossed out clauses granting Harry access to confidential briefings. He returned the page without speaking. Charles read the amendments and breathed slowly. He asked whether his son could support a strictly ceremonial arrangement. William said yes, but only if Catherine was consulted and conditions were stated clearly. The father and son had reached a compromise. Yet the world had already seen the missing bow, and the palace still had to decide what truth it would present. Their private agreement repaired the conversation, but the image outside that room had already taken on a life of its own. By sunrise, the photograph was everywhere. Charles standing expectantly, William upright before him, and the unmistakable distance between father and son. The image became larger than the engagement itself. It was interpreted as rebellion, generational change, family heartbreak, and even the beginning of a transfer of power. Yet behind the headlines, the two men had already reached a fragile understanding. The challenge now was whether the public would accept reconciliation after witnessing defiance with its own eyes. Charles watched the morning coverage alone. Newspapers, broadcasters, and online commentators called the missing bow the clearest public disagreement between a reigning monarch and his heir in modern memory. That mattered because the crown depends on continuity, the belief that one generation will support the next without exposing private fractures. Palace communications staff drafted a statement describing the incident as a brief departure from ceremonial sequencing. Ceremonial sequencing means the planned order of gestures and movements during an official royal event. Advisors rejected the phrase immediately. The footage showed William stopping on purpose, and any denial would make the palace look dishonest. Charles heard one commentator describe him as a father losing control of both his family and his succession. The king lowered the volume, but he did not turn off the screen. His private agreement with William had brought relief. Yet the public story still reduced him to a wounded monarch waiting for respect that never came. William felt no victory. The prince watched the same moment repeat across every channel and realized his protest had swallowed its own meaning. Instead of discussing trust, consultation, and Harry's proposed role, the nation was debating whether he had deliberately insulted his father. Outside Buckingham Palace, a crowd gathered beneath the gates, as a newspaper vendor raised a front page showing both men face to face. The headline read, "The Bow That Broke." Some defended the future king. Others called his action cruel. A royal correspondent sharpened the debate during a live morning program. She called the moment not the collapse of the monarchy, but the public arrival of its next era. Her words captured the fear surrounding Charles and the expectation gathering around William. The palace finally released a photograph from the private meeting and confirmed that the prince would return to the Commonwealth planning session. Catherine saw the announcement online and finally exhaled. Camilla read it moments later and understood that the compromise had limited her influence over Harry's future role. The crisis had been contained, but not settled in public. The photograph of defiance had defined the conflict. Now a second encounter would reveal whether father and son could replace humiliation with understanding before the watching nation once again. 1 week later, Charles and William appeared together again. The setting was quieter, the audience smaller, but every camera waited for the same moment. This time, the prince approached his father and bowed. Yet the gesture no longer represented surrender. It followed a private agreement that respected the king's wish for reconciliation and the heir's demand for safeguards. Charles responded not with cold formality, but by placing a hand briefly on his son's shoulder. The monarchy had not avoided conflict. It had survived honesty. Charles arrived at the military remembrance ceremony, knowing the smallest gesture would carry enormous weight. A remembrance ceremony is a formal event honoring those who served and died in conflict. The occasion mattered because duty, sacrifice, and national unity stood at its heart, making personal rivalry impossible to hide behind private walls. William met his father before they entered. The prince spoke quietly and admitted that his refusal had caused public pain. He did not withdraw the reason for his protest, but he regretted turning a necessary challenge into a wound the king had to endure before the nation. Charles accepted the apology without demanding surrender. The monarch acknowledged that treating his heir like another subordinate had deepened the crisis. He then confirmed through their recorded private exchange that Harry's revised arrangement would proceed only after consultation with William and Catherine. The agreement was narrow and clear. Harry could attend 2 ceremonial events, meaning public duties built around representation rather than political authority. He would receive no strategic briefings, private state papers, or permanent institutional role. Reconciliation would be offered, but trust would not be assumed. William then stepped before Charles and bowed. The king placed one hand on his son's shoulder. "We move forward together," he said. William rose and answered, "Together, but honestly." Catherine watched with relief. The princess knew her husband had defended his principles without destroying his bond with his father. Camilla accepted the settlement publicly, yet her earlier attempt to force punishment had reduced her influence over future decisions involving the Prince and Princess of Wales. The first missing bow had exposed a monarchy trapped between inherited obedience and necessary accountability. The second proved that respect means more when it follows truth instead of fear. Charles remained king. William remained the loyal heir. Neither man defeated the other. The father kept his dignity. The son kept his convictions. And the crown survived because both accepted that disagreement could be endured. But silence, exclusion, and resentment could not. Their relationship emerged changed, tested, but finally intact. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.